Now, you may have seen the extract from professional surfer Owen Wright's autobiography, Against the Water, in the Weekend Australian magazine on Saturday, as his friend and fellow pro surfer Mick Fanning says on the cover of the book, Owen's story is, quote, the all-time sporting comeback, unquote. Well, you can say that again. Wright suffered a traumatic brain injury while in Hawaii in December 2015. He was in Hawaii to compete in the final event of the year, the Pipe Masters, as one of 6 contenders for that year's world title. But the brain injury robbed him of that chance. It was so severe, in fact, that he could barely talk or walk, let alone think straight. For much of 2016, it seemed doubtful that he would ever surf again, let alone competitively. But he did. And spectacularly won the Quicksilver Pro at Snapper Rocks on the Gold Coast in 2018 and won Australia's first surfing Olympic medal, a bronze, at the Olympic Games in Japan in 2020. I met Wright myself in February 2015, 10 months before the brain injury, when I did a profile of his family for the Weekend Australian magazine. The Wrights were the quintessential surfing family back then. Their father, Rob, raising 5 kids who were both skilled and ambitious. The previous generation of pro surfers often came from broken families in poor beachside suburbs. To them, pro surfing was not only a relatively lucrative alternative to their limited options in life, but glamorous too. The Pro Tour was madly hedonistic back then, and plenty of promising young surfers were burned out by the drugs and alcohol that flowed freely before, after, and even during professional surf contests. But the Wrights were a new generation, raised by Dad Rob, a hardcore and clean-living teetotal surfer, and Fiona, a dedicated, supportive mum. Owen qualified for the 2010 Pro Tour aged only 20 and won Rookie of the Year that year. His younger sister, Tyler, followed him onto the tour and would go on to win 2 world titles. I spent a day with the family researching the story, and they were both extremely hospitable and fun to be around. Their love of surfing was intense. But there is something about the story of Owen's injury that doesn't add up. Normally, this wouldn't matter much. Surfers are not always the most reliable storytellers. They come back from trips up the coast or overseas filled with exaggerated yarns about how huge and perfect the waves were, just to make their mates jealous. Tall stories are part of surf culture. But the inconsistencies of this story matter because it has become central to the Owen Wright myth, which sports-loving Australians, both surfers and non-surfers, have lapped up in good faith. So, let's pick it apart. In the book, Owen says he paddled out at Pipeline on the north shore of Oahu early on the morning of December 10, 2015, a few hours before the contest was due to start. He says the waves were, quote, the biggest waves I'd seen at Pipe, unquote. This seems a bit unlikely. This is the first wave caught in the first heat, just a few hours after Owen says he was in the water. It looks big, but it's not big by Hawaiian standards. 2015 was Wright's 6th year on the Pro Tour, so it's unlikely he'd never seen waves bigger than this at Pipeline. Wright doesn't say how many people were in the water for that early morning practice session, only that he paddled past all of them to catch his first wave. When he started to paddle back out, he got caught inside, which means a set of bigger waves approached and he was too close to shore to paddle over them. In the book, the first wave was 15 feet, but in a recent interview with sports journalist Mark Howard, he called the wave, quote, every bit of like 12 feet, unquote. In the book, He says the wave knocked him senseless. Quote, "Apparently when I surfaced, I was conscious but white as a sheet, expressionless, a ghost," unquote. He doesn't say who made this observation, but it can't have been his friend Mick Fanning. When this incident was recounted for the ABC's Australian Story in 2017, Fanning was central to it. It begins with a voiceover saying, quote, "The day before Pipeline started, the boys were out for a warm-up surf," unquote. Well, hang on. The day before? In the book, it was the morning of. Whatever day it was, the imagery used by the ABC gives the impression that Wright and Fanning were in the water, either alone or with only a few other people. Fanning told the ABC that when he dived under that first wave, Wright was 10 feet in front of him. When he resurfaced, he looked around and saw Wright was 20 feet behind, but, quote, "I didn't think anything of it." In the Howard interview, Wright recently doesn't mention Fanning being in the water with him at all, although he does make a vague reference to friends seeing him resurface 50 metres further in. This is 5 times the distance Fanning said Wright travelled while being pummeled by that first wave. Now, after that first wave, Wright got stuck in the impact zone and copped a set of 10 more big waves on the head. This is an unusually high number of waves for a set. Most sets are only 3 or 4 waves. Finally, he made it to the beach, Wright says in the book, where he was joined by Kiwi pro surfer Riccardo Christie, who had been washed in. According to the book, Wright then, quote, "shuffled to the house the whole way muttering, 'Oh, I'm effed, unquote. Now, it's strange that not a single photographer recorded this. The beach at Pipeline is crawling with photographers during the contest, yet not one of them noticed a world title contender copping the flogging of his life in the impact zone, then shuffling up the beach, muttering to himself. The ABC story doesn't mention Riccardo Christie at all. Rather, it was Fanning who met him on the shore after they both caught a wave and paddled in. At this point, according to the Australian Story version, Fanning wasn't even alarmed.
That. And we both walked up the beach together. He seemed perfectly fine.
Perfectly fine? In the book, Wright returned to the house and told his sister Tyler, quote, "I got flogged," unquote. He tried to eat some breakfast but couldn't taste it. "What the F, my sense of taste had gone," he says in the book. In the Howard interview, he says he was, quote, "slurring my words a little bit," unquote, as soon as he got back to the house. In the book, he doesn't mention slurring until after he wakes from a nap, which Fanning says was around lunchtime, at which point he started to shake uncontrollably and convulse. That was when an ambulance was called and he was taken to hospital. So, what are we meant to make of this? From commentators Martin Potter and Joe Turpel at the start of the first heat that morning.
Just want a quick shout out for Owen Wright. You know, mate, we hope you're okay. We're going to miss you, but I'm sure he'll be back and, you know, a bit bigger and better and stronger.
That's right. Always thinking about Owen Wright. He said those things take time, so he's going to just get better and watch the show go down.
He said things take time. What things? He's just going to get better and watch the show? At that moment, surf fans around the world were tuning in to watch Wright and five other surfers compete for the 2015 world title. Now, Wright was going to just get better and watch the show. That's a bit cryptic, isn't it? Besides, according to Fanning, nobody raised the alarm until Wright woke from his nap at lunchtime. How did Potter and Turpel know Wright had already withdrawn from the contest? Fanning was also quoted on the Australian surf website Swellnet saying about Wright, quote, "We surfed together, we talked, then the boys took him for food and he just said he wasn't right. I'm just hoping he's doing well, and from what we hear, he's doing okay, so we're happy for that." The boys took him for food? In the book, Wright says he couldn't eat his breakfast and took a nap. He also says Fanning was there when he was convulsing and told him to, quote, "Hold on." In his recollections of the incident, Wright consistently emphasises the impact of the first wave that hit him, as you would. For a wave to give you a brain injury, it would need to hit you very hard. And in Hawaii, that is certainly plausible. Hawaiian waves can be heavy, although on this day they weren't particularly so. Wright doesn't mention that he was worried about drowning. Pro surfers are supremely capable in big waves, but copping 10-foot waves on the head after the first 15-foot wave gave you some kind of brain injury, well, that's quite a superhuman feat. Wright was scanned at a small local hospital, he doesn't say which one, and was found to have bleeding on the brain. The doctors called another ambulance and sent him to a, quote, larger hospital. Again, the hospital isn't named, even though Wright stayed there for more than a week. His brain was very muddled. Quote, "I was delusional. It took me several days to let go of the idea that I would return to pipe and surf for the title," unquote. The doctors told him he was worse than concussed. He had suffered a traumatic brain injury. One doctor said, quote, "I'd compare the damage to the kind we see in blast victims from war zones or infants shaken with baby syndrome." Again, this is plausible. In Hawaii, the waves there are heavy. But it's weird that Wright is the only person known to have been injured in this way, and by waves that are relatively small by Hawaiian standards. The ambiguities and conflicting versions of this story make it difficult to believe. Perhaps we will never know what really happened. None of this, of course, diminishes Wright's extraordinary recovery. To come back from such a serious injury, let alone to surf competitively again, is testament to his ambition and strength and worthy of enormous admiration. Better still, Wright went on to marry his girlfriend who cared for him throughout the ordeal, and they now have a couple of kids and have settled down on the north coast of New South Wales. It is an inspiring and heartwarming story, the kind that sport-mad Aussies absolutely love. I just wish there was a more believable version of it.